The second movement is expected to be the slow movement, but that would be a rather dubious thing to call it when you look at Beethoven's metronome mark, because he puts it at 120 to a beat, whereas, for instance, in the first movement it's only 112 to a beat. And the time signature here is 3/8, so probably the music is leaning more towards being in 1 than in 3. And the accuracy of Beethoven's metronome marks is of course a whole discussion of its own that I won't go into. But nevertheless, no matter what you think of his metronome marks, you will still have to keep in mind that the 120 that he puts here is considerably faster than what he went on to give to the slow movements of his subsequent symphonies. So no matter what, this is supposed to be a rather lively movement. And nevertheless, character-wise, it is still more calm than the surrounding movements. There aren't as many contrasts, there isn't as much drama, and there isn't the same kind of big symphonic development that there is in the first movement. So it does serve the same function as a typical slow movement in that it provides this more calm moment after the big opening movement. And also it's the slowest of the two middle movements, which are expected to be a contrasting pair. The main theme opens with this leaping fourth, which is borrowed from the first movement where it appeared in the first theme and in the second theme. So now we get this fourth once again at the opening of our new theme. And this fourth goes from C to F, so it takes us away from the C that the previous movement ended on. And brings us into our new key of F major, the main key of the second movement. Incidentally, the opening of the first movement was also a cadence in F major, this C major 7, resolving into F major. So at this point we move away from C major, we move away from the key that we ended in the first movement. But at the same time we repeat the tonal procedure of the opening of the movement, nevertheless, in the beginning of the second movement. Now, this initial theme is played by the second violins unaccompanied, because the opening of this movement is a little fugue passage. And what we get is this fourth, which is then changed to a third, and then to the half step. So the initial gesture, which is first presented as a fourth, it gets smaller until it reaches this half step, until it has become this half step. After this follows a falling passage, which is borrowed again from the second theme of our first movement. These 5 falling scale notes have now become. And now, since this high B flat did not get a resolution, we now go back up onto it scale-wise. And now where it finally gets its resolution, the second voice enters. So the movement sounds like this from the beginning. Not as clearly experienced as in the first movement, since the second theme, which follows straight after this, this second theme is merely repeating little fragments of the first theme. We get this initial interval, it has now become this. And we get the half step, and we get note repeats, seem very much like an independent theme. And also it goes back into a soft dynamic after the forte, which is also the dynamic that the first theme emerged from. So it merely seems to be some kind of continuation of the first theme, but it is nevertheless the second theme of our sonata form. Towards the end of the exposition, we get this little rhythm in the timpani, which adds a little bit more rhythmic focus and a bit more weight to the music, and it's a very noticeable element in this second movement. Then in the development section, the tonality moves from C minor over to D flat major, again the same rhythm, and then back to C major. So again we get this half step between the different sections. And then towards the transition into the reprise, we get this very beautiful chain of little rising and some falling half step motifs. And then, as we get back to the prise, the little fugue is changed to a double fugue. And so on. The coda of the second movement goes from bar 163 and until the end. And in here we hear the theme played once again, but now extended largely. Typical feature of Beethoven to have these extra eventful codas where he goes on developing his ideas instead of bringing the music to a close. What we hear is the theme played for 8 bars, and then the final 4 of those bars are repeated twice. And the second time they repeated, they even extended into 7 bars. Every time they repeat it, they move up, and the way that they move up is by having the violins move up by half steps between these passages. The first time they do so is at bar 170, where they go and take us from F major up to G minor. And then we hear these 4 bars, and then again at bar 174, they go up now by 3 half steps, taking us up to B flat major. And then during the final 7 bars we modulate back into F major. So at this point the theme is now extended and it's stretching itself and moving upwards, and only after quite a considerable time it's now coming back and settling into F major. So it's like the final big breath before we are ready to settle down. Then follows 8 bars which are repeating the first 4 bars of the theme. But it's a little bit unusual here because the melody is shared out between different instruments, and also whereas the theme first time we heard it, the first 4 bars end on the dominant. And now this falling scale is extended so that we get back into the tonic again. And then we hear the same 4 bars again, but the second time there's a flute added which goes in the opposite direction. So at this point during those 8 bars we have gone back to F major twice, so it indicates that the music is settling little by little, getting ready to end. And then the final 6 bars are just a cute little play between our half step and then these rising and falling scale ideas.